I have the privilege of being the ADA's Vice President of Operations in Science and Healthcare, but I also live with type 1 diabetes and have been doing so since I was a teenager. So for many, many, many years, I have been a staunch diabetes advocate. And as you probably know, the ADA's Safe at School program is devoted to protecting the legal rights of students with diabetes while they are in school environments. And I just couldn't be more delighted to help guide us through this time so that we can ensure that students can learn and thrive in safe, healthy school environments, as well as be treated fairly. So today I have the pleasure of introducing our co-presenters. They are going to focus on a federal law known as Section 504, or as people often say, the 504 plan. That's what we're going to be talking about. This law requires schools to provide accommodations to students to enable them to optimize their education with the provision of needed diabetes care by their schools. This is such an important opportunity to learn and an opportunity to help your student, the child that you care about, succeed in the school setting. This afternoon, our co-presenters are going to provide guidance for navigating the 504 process, how to work with your child's school to develop your child's individualized 504 plan. That's right, it can be individualized. And as we go through our discussion, it's going to be really important to remember that the rights of students with diabetes do not go away during a global pandemic. We still need to make sure that children and youth with diabetes are taken care of in the best possible way. So together, we are going to make sure that all children with diabetes are safe at school. So here's how this is going to work. We're going to ask you to type your questions into the chat box. And about halfway through this program, we're going to answer some of the questions. And then we're going to go back to that chat box at the end of our panel discussion and answer as many of the remaining questions as we can. The chat feature is down at the bottom of your screen if you're on Zoom, and it should be easy to identify, and we have moderators that are watching and noting the questions so that we can make sure to get you as much guidance and support as possible. We can't begin fully without giving a big thank you to Lilly Diabetes for their sponsorship of this event and of our Safe at School Fall Back to School series. So thank you so much for your help, Lilly Diabetes. So now it's time for introductions and our co-presenters. And I have to tell you, I'm so incredibly honored to introduce these two very special women to you. They are special to me personally. So let me tell you a little bit about them. Joyce Boudin is a T1D parent and a longtime ADA Safe at School advocate who has presented dozens of Safe at School workshops and has worked tirelessly to keep children with diabetes safe at school. Now, I first met Joyce 14 years ago when she and her daughter Alexis attended a support group meeting for newly diagnosed families. Alexis was really little back then. I think she was about 5 years old at the time. And I had the pleasure and the opportunity to talk to Alexis about the insulin pump that I was wearing at the time. So that's our special connection. And then the second presenter is Crystal Woodward, and she is the ADA's Director of Safe at School. She's also a parent of a child who's now a grown-up adult with type 1 diabetes. And for the last 22 years, Crystal has led our Safe at School campaign, which has made outstanding progress. In fact, Crystal and I met way back at the very beginning when this was just starting. And that was in the spring of 1999. Happened to be a special year for me. I was the Miss America at that time, and we met in an elevator in the Virginia General Assembly, where she successfully lobbied the Virginia state legislators to pass the very first Safe at School bill in the country, and the rest is history. Oh my goodness. So what incredible leaders we have on this panel in this forum today. Crystal and Joyce, thank you for being here, and thank you for being willing to share your knowledge with all of us. So let me now turn the reins over to you so that you can teach us about 504 plans.
Thank you, Nicole, for your kind introduction and for joining us for part of our program today. And Joyce, thank you for co-presenting this important information for parents today. And thanks to everyone who's taking the time out of their day, whether it's morning or afternoon. We so appreciate you being here and hope this information will be helpful to you as you send your child with diabetes back to school. Again, many thanks to Lilly Diabetes for sponsoring our Fall Back to School series. As a reminder, we are recording this program so that everybody can access it later. And just check our social media, check our website, and there will be more information about how you can access this program and also the first two events of the three-part series. And again, just to remind you to please type your questions in the chat box as we go along. And then about halfway through the program, we will take a little break from presentation and do our best to answer your questions. So here we go. So today, as Nicole mentioned, we're going to focus on Section 504 plans and legal protections for children with diabetes, and also the school's legal obligations to provide diabetes care and to treat your child fairly at school. And then, again, as we go along, we'll answer your questions about what to include in your child's 504 plan to make sure that your child is healthy, safe, and is treated fairly at school. So after the first part of this presentation, we'll answer questions, and then we're going to move on to a more in-depth discussion of what provisions actually go into your individualized child's 504 plan. So our mission, ADA's mission, is to prevent and cure diabetes and improve the lives of all people affected by diabetes. And this includes children and youth with diabetes. We deliver our mission through research, information and support, advocacy, and public awareness. Today, we're going to focus on the advocacy component, specifically Safe at School, and how ADA, through its Safe at School campaign, provides resources and support to make sure that parents do all they can to advocate on behalf of their child to make sure their child is appropriately accommodated at school. So whether it be during the school day, at an after-school event, before school event, field trip, sports activity, schools are required under Section 504 to provide diabetes care to our children. Also, I just want to mention, if to stay current on what's happening in ADA's advocacy world, be sure to sign up to be an ADA influencer, and you can sign up at diabetes.org/ADA influencers. You can stay up to date on all that's going on in advocacy, and including Safe at School, and what's new policy-wise, and what's new in terms of resources for you, our families. So first, we're going to briefly and very generally talk about federal legal protections, and then we'll focus on the protections afforded by Section 504. So as you can see, this slide points out the three major laws, the three major federal laws. We have the Americans with Disabilities Act. We have Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. So that's a mouthful. So I'll just call that Section 504. And we have the Individuals with Disabilities and Education Act. And please know that there are also state laws. Most of the states have laws that impact who at your child's school can provide care, whether it be care is limited to provision by the school nurse, or whether trained school personnel such as teachers and guidance counselors and principals can provide that care. So while we're focusing on Section 504 today, please be sure to go to ADA's website to learn more about all the federal laws that impact the care provided to children with diabetes at school. And be sure to go on the website to learn more about your state's laws. If you go to diabetes.org/safe at school, there's a drop-down box and you can drop right down and click on your state to see whether or not trained teachers and others are allowed under statute to give insulin, whether they're allowed to give glucagon, whether there's any provision in the law that requires schools to allow capable students to manage their own diabetes at school anywhere, anytime. So be sure to check out those state laws. So to be protected by Section 504, students must have a disability. And of course, there is a legal definition to disability. So we'll explain how diabetes fits into that definition. But basically what you need to know is that a disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities, okay? So, and this includes children with diabetes. It's not limited to adults in the workplace or adults in other places of public accommodation like concert venues and sport venues and airports, but it includes children at school and at daycare. So the physical impairment, of course, is diabetes. And there are a whole bunch of major life activities that are substantially limited by diabetes. And this is a list right here. A few years back, the Americans with Disabilities Act was amended to specifically include the major life activity of endocrine function. So because of that amendment to the ADA, we now have endocrine functions. So diabetes is an endocrine chronic illness, so diabetes does qualify as a disability under federal law. So for 504, there are certain schools and institutions, organizations having legal obligations to provide services or diabetes care to our students with diabetes. So under 504, all public schools, including charter schools, have a legal obligation to provide diabetes care to our children. In addition, private schools, including religious affiliated schools, receiving federal financial assistance also have a legal obligation to provide diabetes care. And I often get the question about how my child is in parochial school. How do I find out whether or not my child's school receives federal financial assistance? Well, I will tell you that most of the religious affiliated schools do receive assistance, but the best thing to do is to go to the annual report, talk to the board, talk to the administrator of the school, and find out what types of programs your child's school is involved with, whether it's free lunch, free breakfast, library, computer programs, it's federally funded. That's where you could find out whether or not your school does receive federal financial assistance. So under 504, what are schools required to do? Well, first, they're required to identify children with diabetes, and that seems to be very basic. But I have to tell you, many schools do not proactively identify children with disability. More than likely and more often, it's the parent who has to reach out to the 504 coordinator to let the coordinator know that his or her child has diabetes and that they want to put a 504 plan in place for that child. Under 504, schools must provide needed accommodations, and these accommodations need to be consistent with the child's diabetes medical management plan or the child's diabetes provider's orders for the school setting. Schools must provide free and appropriate public education to each child with a disability. And this essentially means schools can't charge parents for providing diabetes care to their child. We need to educate children with disabilities, including diabetes, with other students as much as possible. Allow parents to participate in these meetings. When the 504 meeting is set up, the parent should receive notice, ample notice, that the meeting is going to be taking place, and be given an opportunity to meaningfully participate in that meeting and to make those important decisions about what accommodations will be provided to your child. And also, children with diabetes need to have the same opportunity to participate in all school-sponsored activities, the same as their peers, whether it's a field trip, whether it's a classroom party, whether it's trying out for the football team or auditioning for a school play. Children with diabetes need to have equal access. And what I mean by that is there should always be someone on site, whether it's a school nurse or a trained teacher or a coach, who has received training to take care of the child's needs. And this includes not just during the school day, but it extends to extracurricular activities and any kind of school-sponsored activity. So I just wanted to make sure I got that in there. So right now we're going to stop. And Sarah, if you want to read the questions from the chat box, we'll do our best to answer those questions before we continue.
Hello, and the first question comes from Felice. For those of us with type 1 students headed to college, I was told that the 504 will follow them there. Is that correct? I've always had a meeting with the teacher and nurse team. Should that be the same process for college?
Oh, that's a great question, Ms. Wiggins. So the 504 plan does not follow our children to college. In fact, the rules are quite different for college. Students with diabetes and other disabilities still have protections under 504 and ADA, but the student must go, first of all, go to the colleges or the post-secondary institutions disability office and identify herself or himself as a person with a disability. So that student has to proactively go to the disability office and work with that disability office to make sure that appropriate letters of accommodation are issued. And letters of accommodation, think of them as not equal to a 504 plan, but think of them as a way of putting in writing what accommodations are needed by that student. And then it's really up to the student whether or not he or she wants to share a letter of accommodation with the professor. And some of those accommodations for college will include things like having the ability to register early for classes, or being able to live in a dorm room close to a cafeteria. What will not happen, which is very different from K through 12, is there will not be trained personnel to take care of your child. There's no requirement that the resident advisor, for example, be trained in Glucagon. So your child will need to work on that when he or she gets to school, to try, to figure out who is going to be made aware of your child's diabetes and who is going to be trained or educated on especially what a low looks like and what to do in the event of hypoglycemia. So there's more information on post-secondary rights on our website. In fact, we have a self-advocacy guide for post-secondary students on the website. So I would suggest that you look at that for more information.
And we have another question from Erin. Says, I am wondering the safety of having a student walk to the front office when going through low blood sugar. For example, if the playground is across campus and the activity is causing a drop in the blood sugar significantly, what are my legal rights to have my lows treated where my type 1 child is located?
Yeah, well, our ADA's recommendation is to treat the low on the spot, right? Students should not have to risk their safety by walking to the office, especially if they're low. So there should be always somebody within the area who can, whether it's the playground, the gym, the classroom, who can recognize and treat a low, whether it be with a glucose tab or, a severe low, then it's possible even glucagon would be needed. So there needs to be somebody on site who can treat that low without the necessity of walking to the clinic. And incorporate that with your child's 504 plan, write that into the plan.
And then another question related to that. Even if a school is cooperating with the parent, should a 504 plan still be put in place?
Oh, that's the best time to put a plan in place. Put a plan in place when everything's going well. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know if the same personnel will be in place at our child's school tomorrow. So be proactive, not reactive. Put that 504 plan in place right now while things are going well.
And we have one final question for right now. And that is, what rights do I as a parent have to insist that schools use the ADA 504 plan as a template? I received a great deal of pushback, and the school insists that they only use a Word doc to list accommodations.
Well, we do know that some school districts, New York City public schools is an example of a school district. They do have their own 504 plan, but regardless of the form or the format, the important consideration is what goes into the 504 plan. It's not so much whose form we're using. Let's just make sure that we get all of the accommodations in the 504 plan that are needed by your child. Okay, well, great. I'm going to turn the program over to Joyce, who's going to take a deeper dive into the substance of 504 plans. Joyce, thank you.
Thank you, Crystal, and thank you all participants for those great questions. Those were very, very good questions. So we're going to do a little deeper dive, as Crystal just said, into the actual 504 plans. So here is just a really quick view of the various plans, just so that when we talk about the various types of plans and terminology, we're all understanding them similarly. So the DMMP is the doctor's order. So that's what you receive from the doctors, and it really details every aspect of your child's care in terms of emergency diabetes care related to their specific routine. And that's written by the healthcare team. Then we have the 504 plan or the IEP. So those are education plans. So those detail both the healthcare items, pretty much itemized list of what's required to keep the child safe at school, educator related aid services and accommodations, special education services, all of the things that the student may need as it relates to them and their education. So that's completed by the 504 team as well as, or the IEP team, depending on which plan your child has. Then there's the individual health plan. So that's written by the school nurse, but that is again in consultation with the DMMP. So that's the specific plan for the school nurse on how they're going to execute their DMMP and deliver those that level of care that's described in the DMMP. And then the school nurse also may have an emergency care plan. So it's a resource type tool or toolkit, if you will, for the staff, and it's specific information on how to recognize and treat hypo and hypoglycemia. It's a way for the school nurse to educate the rest of the school staff on hypo and on how to treat hypo and hyperglycemia. Okay, next. So what is a Section 504 plan? So it really is, in its simplest terms, a written document of what the parents and the school agree to in terms of the modifications that the student will need for their care. So each child with diabetes has individual needs, stressing the word individual. So while the school may have a template that they use, or you may use the ADA's template. It is simply that, a template, but it is customized to the individual needs of each child with diabetes. So the Section 504 plan, it's not a cookie cutter, but it is more of an outline for the that must be developed individually. You can find a template for the diabetes 504 plan at diabetes.org/504 plan. It's a great template to use. And again, even if the school has their own template, this serves as a good guide for the contents of what you may want to consider for your child. Okay, so let's talk about how we navigate the process for the 504, the IEP. So these are just some of the initial steps. The first and foremost thing to know is to approach the school and the negotiation collaboratively, because it is a joint venture with you and the school. So approach it in the spirit of cooperation and be proactive as well. So the first step is to contact the school's 504 coordinators. So every school has a 504 coordinator, and many times this is the school principal or the guidance counselor, but it can also be a school psychologist. It could be a different teacher at the school, but they all typically have that tag of 504 coordinator. So you can find out from your school who that is and make contact with that individual. In some instances, the school may initiate the development of a 504 or IEP plan if they identify or suspect the need that the child has a need for some specific services related to education or other related services. So they may initiate that. But as Crystal mentioned earlier, it's typically incumbent upon the parent to contact the school and initiate that 504 IEP discussion. So an evaluation will be conducted by the school staff or someone that's knowledgeable about your child to determine eligibility for the 504 plan or the IDEA. Once that eligibility has been determined, then the team will convene to develop a written plan. So the written plan itself, it is so critical that that everything is handled in writing. So the parents or guardians should communicate everything in writing. So even after the initial phone call, follow-up phone calls, it is highly recommended that you follow up each of those verbal communications with writing to make sure that you have a shared understanding of what was communicated and that it is documented. And definitely if that's not agreed to, definitely insist on getting responses in writing. Legal implications for writing it down. It's a great quote here by Jim Wright. If it was not written down, then it wasn't said. If it was not written down, then it didn't happen. So again, it's a way for you and the school to be on the same page about what was agreed to, what was communicated, and what was not agreed to, quite frankly, so that, again, you're all on the same page to ensure that the accommodations were clear. So you heard me reference earlier the IEP team or the 504 team. So once the eligibility has been determined, so the parent is the key component of the 504 team. So never let them have a 504 meeting without you. You are an integral part of this team. Depending on your age of your student and your own preferences there, the student could be a part of that team discussion as well. The regular teachers, the PE teachers, therapists, any specialties, teachers like music, art teachers should be present as well. The school nurse, as you heard me mention, actually is documenting certain requirements, so he or she should be present in that meeting as well. What happened to my slides? Um, the slides went away on my end, so I don't know what happened, if the parents can still see them. And the school counselor, school psychology, and anyone else that you wish to attend that 504 meeting could be present as well. So in some instances, it is a very emotional meeting sometimes. So you may choose to invite someone there just as a support for you. But it is up to you, again, if you wish for someone else to attend the meeting. But the core participants are the 504 coordinator, the parents, the students, the school counselor, the teachers should be present so that they can hear the information as well. So now, while we're working on getting the slides back up, I'm going to continue on briefly just to highlight some of the things that you should consider for including in your individual 504 plan. So I'm going to first say that depending on the age and maturity of your child, some of these things, may or may not be relevant, but so that's a huge factor. So if you have an elementary age child who's newly diagnosed, some of your considerations will be very different from a high school student who has been diagnosed living with the diabetes for 10 years. But also the level of independence of the child with diabetes should be considered as well. So if the child needs a lot of supervision in administering care, then perhaps that should be a factor for you to consider as you're developing the 504 as well, for the contents of the 504. If your child is very independent and has demonstrated as such, and you and your physician agree on the level of independence there, that should be a factor in terms of what should be included in the 504 plan as well. So also consider the technology. So if your child has a insulin pump, there are certain things that you may want to include in your plan versus a child on multiple daily injections. If you have a CGM, there are different considerations of things you may want to have included in the 504 versus if they don't have a CGM. So again, the technology, the independence of the child, the age, the maturity, those are all things to consider when you're documenting the 504 plan. So if you've been at the school before, or if you've been transferred to a new school, you may also want to consider your experiences with dealing with that particular school or other schools. There may be things that you've learned along the way that, wow, I wish I had that in the 504 2 years ago. Well, now is the time to, because remember, the 504 plan is an annual plan. So that is reviewed and revisited every year or during the year if your child's regimen has changed. So again, you just consider those things as you're developing the 504. Think about field trips and extracurricular activities and how you'd like to have those handled. That should be included. But very importantly too is to look at your state laws and understand those state laws and understand what the requirements are. Some states have specific guidelines on glucagon administration or even insulin administration. So make sure you understand those and what that says in terms of what can be allowed for the school in the state that you're in. Next. So after you've thought about those various considerations, now it's time to have the meeting. But go into the meetings with a negotiation mindset, right? Because this is about negotiation. Ask for the world, ask for the universe, but expect the world. Because again, this is about keeping our kids safe at school. So it should be some negotiations going on. But as you prepare for your 504 meeting, think about what are the accommodations that you must have in place to make sure your child is safe at school. Again, thinking about the technology they use, their level of independence or dependence. What are the things that your child must absolutely have? So what are the non-negotiables in your mind? So for example, it may be critical for you, for all of us actually, that there's someone at the school that's trained and available at all times. That must be in place for our kids to be safe at school. Now then you would think about what are the nice to have. So what are those things that would be nice to have, but without it, the child would still be safe at school. So checking the BG or the blood glucose levels in the classroom for a child that needs assistance may be a nice to have to be able to do that in the classroom versus having to go to the nurse to do that. But without it, as long as the BG gets checked, that may be viewed as a nice to have in your scenario. So think about those things in advance. Think about what you're willing to negotiate on. You go into the session asking for all of those things, but recognize that if you receive pushback on certain things or things that are just not practical for the school, figure out what the middle ground is for those things. And those things that are non-negotiable, be prepared to articulate that. And remember, that many of the people in the 504 team may not have had experience with diabetes at all, but they've definitely maybe have not had experience with your child with diabetes, which could be very different than their other experiences. And then think about what are some of the compromises that you may be able to make, and get creative and maybe talk to other parents about some of those things before you go into that meeting. Having that in your head before the meeting really helps you have an effective meeting. So now that you're there or you're working on these things, here's some possible content or things that you may consider having in your 504. Someone at school that's trained for all school sponsored activities. That may be something that you want to include in the 504. For students that are able, you may indicate that you'd like for them to self-manage and only go see the school nurse when they're under certain circumstances. Alternate test taking times if their blood glucose levels are out of range. You'd want to document that in the 504, that if their blood sugar is below 60 or whatever range you determine, the range that their doctor determines, that can't take their test during that time. Many schools have policies around cell phone usage and Wi-Fi usage. So access to cell phone may be important if they have a CGM, or if for other reasons you may want to include in the 504 that the child has access to the cell phone at all times without without having any repercussions for having the phone, using it appropriately, of course. Access to snacks, water, and restroom. There are many rules around how many restroom breaks, water breaks, and different things like that in school. But again, for our children with diabetes, access to those things are very important. COVID-19 precautions, you'd want to consider what's important for your child to have and include it in the 504. We'll talk about that briefly here in a few seconds as well. And then what are the other things that should be included simply just to keep your child safe and healthy at school? Think about PE and different things and the time of day or the part of the country you live in, how hot it gets sometimes if they're doing those particular activities and that impact on their blood glucose. So those types of things you'll want to think about including in your 504. So now let's talk about a little about your child's rights in COVID. It is just very critical that you all are aware that and fully understand that those rights that Crystal talked about earlier, those federal laws that provide protections, legal protections, as well as the state laws, though that doesn't go away during the global pandemic. So those rights are still enforceable and still in place, and we still have to navigate that through the pandemic. So students with diabetes should have a 504 IEP and other written accommodations, whether they're going to school in person, virtually, or or in some hybrid learning situation. All of those scenarios, still the child should have a 504 IEP or written accommodations in place, partnering with the school. Um, we have to remember, as I said earlier, that we still need to approach the school, the 504 team, and the 504 process by being open-minded and reasonable, and so that we can adapt to those changes and precautions related to COVID. Again, it's approaching the school with the spirit of cooperation and negotiation. So some of the potential contents you could have in your 504s relates to COVID are requiring 3 to 6 feet physical distancing between desks on the bus, lining up with the CDC guidance. That's potentially something you would want to discuss with the school and have in place in your 504, requiring face coverings for unvaccinated students, providing 2 separate clinics, one for well kids and one for sick kids is something that could potentially, you could discuss with the school as well. Having some protocols around cleaning and disinfecting the areas, the desks, the drink fountains, those types of things, or things that could be in the 504 as well. Not sharing equipment such as musical instruments and keyboards and things like that. Not sharing food. There's a list of other things that related to COVID and the 504 plan. If you go to diabetes.org // safe at school, SAS COVID, lots of good additional information and resources there for you as well. So at virtual learning, there typically are a lot of questions around the virtual learning and the 504. If virtual learning is supported by the school and authorized by the student's diabetes provider, so access to virtual learning is very key, and in many districts that might be the only option. But again, 504 plan can address some of that. So virtual learning, still the child should have a 504 plan. And again, remember that the rights don't change during the pandemic. So as you're in the negotiations with the school, remember that those accommodations and those federal and state laws give you the right to have some of those conversations, but request those accommodations as well. And then there may be a provision for some additional emotional support for counseling that may be needed for the child with diabetes. Again, based on the individual child's needs. And again, diabetes.org /SAS COVID for some additional information. So in the virtual learning environment, some of the accommodations, again, are a little unique, but if you think about it, it's very similar to what would be accessible and needed in the face-to-face environment. So telehealth visits by the school nurse. So in the virtual setting, those are not in person, obviously, but virtually via telehealth visits or other healthcare resources that may be needed for the child. Permitting off-camera breaks to care for the diabetes. So for example, if the child were in school, they'd be missing class potentially to go to visit the school nurse. Likewise, in a virtual environment, you would want to include in the accommodation allowing for off-camera breaks to care for the diabetes. And so if any of your written accommodations that you would have for the in-person setting, those accommodations and plans should be discussed, or the plan should be in place, and the accommodations discussed for the virtual learning environment as well. So what's in your child's 504 plan? So that's the next question for you all to ask individually, thinking about your child's technology that they use, thinking about their level of maturity, what their what their provider is comfortable with, what you're comfortable with. It's time to now really put all of those pieces together and begin thinking about what should be in your child's 504 plan for this this current school year. So I'm going to turn it back over to Crystal to moderate the Q&A. and close us out. Thanks, Crystal.
Thank you, Joyce. That was such a comprehensive review of provisions that normally go into our kids' 504 plans. So we've got the basics there, and I certainly recommend that everybody take a look at ADA's template plan on our website. There are provisions in that plan that may or may not be relevant to your child's situation, but there are provisions in that plan that are relevant to every situation, as Joyce mentioned, such as having available trained personnel on site all the time, whether it's a school nurse or whether it's a trained teacher or other staff member. That's critical. So Sarah, if you don't mind, if you would read questions to Joyce, and I will chime in as well to the answers. I know we've got a few more questions there, which is great.
And hello, Joyce. This question is coming from Facebook. What do you do when a high school does not follow the 504 and says things like, we have a ton of other diabetics and they are fine?
Oh. Okay, so the purpose, it is a written, hopefully the 504 is written and it's not verbal, but if they're not following the written accommodations, that needs to be brought to the attention in writing to the 504 coordinator. And if that is not resolved there, all of the school districts have a policy and a protocol around how to address the violations, if you will, of the 504 plan. So I would really approach the school and understand what's not being met that was agreed to, remind them of what was written in the 504 plan, and then follow their escalation policy for the 504 based on their school district.
Thank you, Joyce. And this question from Alexa kind of follows up on that. Say that you have a 504 and still violate one of the accommodations that was set in the document. What can the parent do, which you answered, but what could happen to the school in that case?
So Crystal, I'm not sure what could happen to the school, but I do know that I've had that experience. So again, it varies depending on the school district and their policy as it relates to that. My experience has been that once it gets escalated maybe one level, it tends to get resolved, because it really then is a discussion about the written accommodations and reviewing what's in writing, and maybe some renegotiation. But then there's typically compliance right after that, is my experience.
Yeah, I just want to, I'm going to chime in to say that educate. When there are quote unquote violations, or the school, maybe it's one teacher who doesn't acknowledge or comply with the plan. The key is education, because many times it is a result of miscommunication. Maybe it's a misunderstanding about diabetes. Maybe it's a misunderstanding about who does what, who's responsible for what. Maybe it's a misunderstanding about the legal obligations of that school to provide care, or to have, a coach trained to give glucagon at football games to an older child. But education is really the key. And go back. If there's an issue, I would say, with a particular teacher, honestly, I would approach that teacher first, and do it in the spirit of cooperation. Approach that teacher. I mean, our kids are in school for a long time, so we want to try to work in harmony and work together. If that doesn't work, then I would elevate the matter to the school principal, to the 504 coordinator. But usually disputes do get resolved before it has to go any further. You should know that ultimately, if there is an issue and it's not being resolved at the school district level, the parent has the option of filing a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights, which is a division of the U.S. Department of Education, or litigating, but we don't recommend that. We have a mantra: educate, negotiate, litigate, legislate. So we don't really want to get into litigation, because first of all, it takes forever. I mean, your second grader could be graduating high school before it makes its way through the court or to a settlement agreement. And secondly, I mean, it's costly. So try to work it out. Start with that teacher and then work your way up is what I recommend.
Awesome. And then this question comes from Esmeralda. My daughter, who's type 1 diabetic, is for the most part self-managed, but she is not allowed to check her blood glucose level on her cell phone without an adult next to her. Is this normal for elementary school students on their cell phones?
I'm sorry, I don't see that question. What's the question again? Is it normal to?
So an adult has to supervise their daughter on their cell phone, which apparently is the device that she's able to check her blood glucose measurements on.
Yeah, so I don't know that that's normal. The school may have had an experience where they're trying to monitor that. But again, I would approach it with the school to find out if that's something you're wishing the child to be able to do on her own without that supervision. Maybe it's discussed with the school, or maybe I'm hearing the question differently. Crystal, do you?
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Joyce. And also, work with the provider to determine that level of independence for your child. And have that provider communicate with the school. It could be that something's going on at school that happens differently from what happens at home. So definitely have an understanding of the why.
Why, yeah.
Of the why. But I think this is all about that level of independence that is indicated on your child's DMMP, diabetes medical management plan, or provider's orders. Your child's diabetes provider should indicate the level of independence for all diabetes care tasks on that form or in those orders. So I think it goes back to what is the child's level of independence, and then what are the school's specific objections to your child being able to look at BG levels on her phone without having an adult supervision. There's just a lot of variables there.
And then the next question, do bus drivers need to be trained by the school for a person with type 1 diabetes with medical needs? Or is it required that my child ride a special population bus for the driver to be trained?
So the school bus driver should be trained by the school as they have a child with diabetes that they're transporting, and that should be something that's discussed and addressed in the 504 plan as well.
Awesome. And then whose responsibility is it to identify a delegate to administer glucagon, or is it Baximil? Does the parent, child, family identify, or the nurse or the school?
So the question is who identifies, who administers the glucagon? So that's a really good question, because that again is a good conversation to have with the school. And I do think it goes back to education, right? Because some people, when they hear and how glucagon is administered, their hands go up, not me, right? So it's really a matter of educating and talking with the different teachers and see who's willing to do it. And sometimes once people are educated, they're willing to learn, willing to go through the training, and willing to be the one that's signed up. For my daughter, it was her computer education teacher who said, oh, I'll get trained, right? And so it really is, so it is incumbent upon you to talk through that with the school. And sometimes you may have a teacher that is already willing and to be trained to do that. Now, was that the question also about who provides the training? Or no?
No, but please elaborate. That would be a good one.
Well, this is one where Crystal alluded to earlier, was a good time to partner with the healthcare providers. Many times the CDE, the Certified Diabetes Educator, is more than willing to work with the school to train the individuals on how to administer the life-saving glucagon, or bequeath me, I think of the name. Okay.
I just want to chime in and just say, yes, I agree with Joyce, work with the school to identify who would, most likely be willing to be trained on glucagon. I mean, everybody knows someone with diabetes, so chances are there could be a teacher in that school, a principal in that school has a child with diabetes, or another relative or friend. But I will also say that ultimately it is the school's legal responsibility to make sure there are trained personnel, there's a backup plan for when the school nurse can't be there. If you live in a state where only a school nurse is allowed to administer insulin or glucagon, then we need to make sure that there's always a school nurse available to do that administration. If you live in a state where other school staff are permitted to be trained to give insulin and glucagon, then we need to make sure that that training has occurred, and that the school nurse and the school administrator have identified folks to go through that training. So ultimately, it is the school's responsibility to make sure that there is care accessible to your child at all times.
Thank you. This question comes from Mary. My daughter is entering high school. She has the accommodations she needs and the extracurricular support. This came about from a legal fight when she was in the 3rd grade. A shout out to Crystal. Thank you for your help. Their buzzword is always independent. I think it is their way of looking to remove support for extracurriculars. I think there should always be someone trained on glucagon where she is located. Advice on what information I can gather around independence and the recommendations for high school.
So I think what I'm hearing in this question too is they're saying she is independent and therefore they don't need to provide any additional support during extracurricular activities. So I think they're conflating here independence potentially with safety, right? So a child can be independent and be able to administer a lot of self-care and monitoring, but it is safest for that child to have someone that's participating in that activity in terms of a trained staff member that can administer services to the child in the event that they cannot due to a healthcare emergency related to diabetes. So there, yes, independence is a very good thing to have to be able to check BG and all those things. But equally important or more important is that there is someone there that is trained in the event that the child, your daughter, does need someone to provide care, and that is the school's responsibility for those extracurricular activities.
And we got one more coming in through the Zoom. Do you see any valid reason why a school should have authorization to my child's medical information by contacting his medical team?
Crystal, maybe I'll volley that one to you.
Yes, absolutely. Certainly, your school nurse should be able to contact your child's diabetes team there might be questions about the order. Anything related to that order, the school nurse should be able to contact your diabetes team. In the event of an emergency, your school will need to contact your child's diabetes team. So, certainly give your consent to do that. It's for the benefit and safety of your child.
Right. And they may be seeing something at school that you're not seeing at home as it relates to that regimen while they're at school, because they're more active, and it's really good partnership to have with the school nurse and the healthcare team.
Thank you. One final question from Facebook. My daughter is going to kindergarten. The school itself said they are not scheduling 504s until after the school year starts. Is this normal? Not sure the time frame or how long it takes to get a 504 in place.
Unfortunately, it is a little common. I wouldn't say it's normal because we don't want it to be normal, but it is common, and it is typically advisable to begin that 504 process discussion at the end of the preceding school year. But in this situation, upon entering kindergarten, I would definitely recommend sending those emails and requesting those meetings as soon as possible. Many times it's a function of the school district nurse having multiple schools that they're responsible for and not being able to be present for those 504 discussions and just simple scheduling. But I would go ahead and initiate those emails and discussions and provide as much information as you can and partner with the teachers where possible to make sure that there is an awareness there. But again, start with that school principal and local 504 coordinator and really be diligent with that. So yes, it definitely is common. And you can still in the interim have some discussions with the school, the principal, making sure they're aware that your daughter is there, making sure that you have some idea of if they've dealt with children with diabetes before, and seeing about getting on that district nurse calendar as well.
I'm just going to chime in quickly to say that your children are covered by Section 504, regardless whether or not they have a written plan.
Mhm.
So in fact, there's actually no legal requirement to have a written plan, but we advise it because it's always, as Joyce said earlier, it's always better to have everything in writing and to have everybody understand their responsibilities under the plan. But there aren't any set legal timelines and timeframes. I would just say a reasonable timeframe, but it's not uncommon to have that first meeting after school starts. And just looking ahead for next year, it is advisable to have the meeting for the next school year at the end of the current school year.
Yeah.
There may be some tweaks you have to do when the next school year starts, but let's go ahead and convene that 504 team and get the 504 written for the following school year. These are great questions. Thanks to you all.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and close the program. Thank you, Joyce. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks to everyone for spending an hour or so of your time with us this afternoon. I hope you found the information informative and helpful. You can get more information on our website at diabetes.org/safe at school. Also, this program is being recorded and will soon be available for you to access anytime. And lastly, I want to thank our sponsor again, Lilly Diabetes, for giving us the opportunity to provide this information today. So wishing everyone a happy, successful, and a safe school year. Thanks again for joining us this afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.